Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty online at foxnews.com. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The Tea Party movement here in the U.S. has become such a political force that it's crossing the Atlantic and taking root in, of all places, the United Kingdom. Remember the basics of the Boston Tea Party? Back on December 16th, 1773, in an act of utter defiance, colonists in Boston stood up against the British government and destroyed tea because the king's tax on the tea cost almost as much as the tea did itself. The colonists had enough of being taxed and having their spending and hard-earned money sent to a centralized government. The British king and parliament had ingenious ways to raise money from us. Tax tea, tax stamps, tax about anything and everything in order to take our money. Today, the federal government, which we have popularly elected, is doing the same thing, and it continues to grow at a record pace. Meanwhile, in Europe, an even bigger and menacing centralized government is being created called the European Union. So what to do? Well, over in Britain, Daniel Hannan, a conservative member of the European Parliament and a champion of human liberty and the free market, just organized his country's first Tea Party. Several hundred folks packed the Brighton Pavilion to hear Daniel Hannan's message of limited government, personal freedom, and the dangers of overtaxation. He joins us now. Daniel, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Hey, Judge, good to be back.
So one does not normally think of British governments when one thinks of overtaxation, personal freedom, doing it by the rules. How is this message resonating in Great Britain today, where you have the biggest of big governments?
Well, we have a big government. I mean, you know what? Ask yourself where those original patriot leaders from Boston got their ideas from. You know, they saw themselves as part of a long tradition of British liberty, stretching back to our glorious revolution, to Hampden and Pym and the Magna Carta and Anglo-Saxon freedoms. You know, these were really British ideas. And you could make the argument that the taxpayers' revolt that triggered the American Revolution started on my side of the Atlantic. It was because our House of Commons wouldn't face its taxpayers with the bill for the 7 Years' War that we were trying to extend it to the colonies in the first place.
You could make the argument that the essence of the Declaration of Independence written by our great Thomas Jefferson came from the ideas written by your great John Locke, couldn't you?
You could almost certainly. In fact, I do make that argument, Judge. I become almost a bore on the subject, my friends tell me. But and how ringingly its phrases apply to our predicament today in the home country. You know, with and now we have a government, as Jefferson wrote then, that has conspired with foreigners to overturn our traditional constitution and laws. So, but you know, we've got a bigger problem than you have on the tax and spend issue. But we've got one thing which makes it brighter, which is that we've got an election looming. I mean, I think that the main difference in approach between your high spenders and our high spenders is that ours had a certain tactical goal, which in its own right made sense, which is they've tried to defer the worst of the downturn until after polling day. Now, that was their thing. If they just borrowed and staved off the full pain of the market correction, it would be somebody else's problem. That's the calculation.
Let me ask you a couple of basics. Is that the Tea Party movement here in the United States is against big government by Republicans and big government by Democrats. Is the Tea Party movement in Great Britain against the Labour government and in favor of the Conservative government, against the European Union, taking traditions and liberties and sovereignty away from Great Britain, or against all big government from whatever source it may come?
It's against all big government, but as I say, there is a difference that we can reasonably hope for a change of government within the next few weeks. And so we do have a real opportunity to turn things around. And I am cautiously optimistic that things would improve very substantially and in a short amount of time. I mean, the Conservatives were in Brighton at the same time as our Tea Party, not by accident, and were promising an emergency budget that would immediately start to tackle the deficit within 60 days of taking over. So there is a hope of immediate redress. But yet the European Union, that is a problem that isn't going to go away. And, you know, here's the funny thing. If you go back to 1773, the cry of no taxation without representation doesn't really apply in the U.S. anymore. I mean, your taxes may be too high,
Right.
they may be rising too quickly, but at least they are set by people that you can vote for and get rid of.
Right.
However, the phrase taxation without representation is increasingly apt within the European Union, which is now moving towards tax-raising powers of its own, but is undemocratic. And so the basic cries, which, by the way, and I don't want to turn this into a history lesson, but it was almost certainly a similar number of people sympathized with the colonists in Great Britain as in the colonies in the 1770s. I mean, it wasn't a full democracy, but that basic old British argument that you shouldn't have excessive or punitive or arbitrary taxation, which got written into your constitution, we need to reclaim that. We want to repatriate our revolution, and we want to reassert the British freedoms that you guys now take for granted.
If Gordon Brown and the Labour Party is thrown out, and David Cameron and the Conservatives come in, will they shrink the government? Will they respect civil liberties? Will they tax less? Or will they be like when George W. Bush replaced Bill Clinton, claimed that they were going to do it, but just continued the same taxing and spending and growth of the government that had existed under his predecessor?
I am optimistic. I mean, nobody can put his hand on his heart and say this is definitely going to happen because I can't see into the future. But everything that I see of David Cameron suggests to me that he is serious about this. I mean, he grasps the gravity of the predicament. We have the same deficit that Greece has, right? To think of Greece is on the point of collapse.
Right.
The only reason that we are not on the point of collapse is because the markets can read the opinion polls and are optimistic about a change of government. So, I think they're right. I mean, generally, I think there is wisdom in crowds, and people are right to be optimistic about a change of government.
About 2 weeks ago, we had a conference in Washington, D.C., here in the United States called the Conservative Political Action Conference. I went to the first one when Richard Nixon was president of the United States. There were 125 people there. At this one 2 weeks ago, there were 10,000. At the end of the conference, your friend and mine, Congressman Ron Paul, received 33% of the vote of those in attendance as their favorite person to run for president. And the person who received the next highest number, former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, who virtually announced his candidacy for president there, only received 22%. You are a student of American politics, as astute as any here is, much less in Great Britain. Do you think the Republican Party or the conservative movement or the Tea Party movement, whatever you want to call it, will join forces to form a more pure Republican Party here, one that Barry Goldwater stood for, Ronald Reagan stood for, you stand for, Ron Paul stands for, of truly smaller government and primacy of the individual?
I am cautiously optimistic by what I have seen happening on the ground, which is that the Republicans have started to narrow in very much on this message of fiscal conservatism. And you know what? They found that it wins votes everywhere, even in Massachusetts. Now, our inaugural Tea Party was in Brighton, which is kind of the British equivalent of Massachusetts. And if I tell you that it's the Green Party's #1 target seat in the whole of the UK, you'll get a sense of the electorate there.
Absolutely.
And even in Brighton, even in Massachusetts, people feel that the government is too big, that it's spending too much, it's borrowing too much, it's taxing too much. You know, you don't have to be a kind of Napolitano, Ron Paul, hardcore conservative to think that things have gone too far. This is a message with huge resonance. Now, look, I'm not going to advise the Republicans on who they should have as their presidential nominee. I mean, one of the consequences of the Boston Tea Party is that this isn't my place anymore as a British politician. But I will say this because I think it's worth saying. I think you are lucky to have in Ron Paul someone who approximates the founder's ideal of a legislator.
Absolutely.
A citizen legislator who takes his oath of office seriously, who puts principle before immediate kind of career decisions, and who, as far as I can tell, has never misled people, has never been less than honest. Now, you know, is that what it takes to be president? Look, that's not for me to decide. But president or not, you're lucky to have him.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Make sure to watch the rest of today's program at foxnews.com/freedomwatch.